Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Shimoda. I am a writer and an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Colorado College. I want to welcome everyone to this Day of Remembrance for Japanese American Incarceration. Today is the 80th anniversary of the signing by FDR of Executive Order 9066, which authorized the dispossession, forced removal, and mass incarceration of Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans during World War II. This is one of many Day of Remembrance events that have been happening all week, that are happening today, including right now. We are here in solidarity with all of them. I'm going to introduce this gathering and our guests, Jami Nakamura Lin, Brynn Saito, Patrick Shiroishi, and Kimiko Tanabe. But first, I want to say thank you to a few entities and individuals for their support. To the Arts at CC, especially Ryan Banagale, the Cultural Attractions Fund, the English Department at Colorado College, especially Erica Hardcastle, who's behind the scenes with us tonight, Tut Library, especially Ladrika Davis and Jesse Randall, and everyone out there who is joining us tonight, who we can't see, but we're very grateful that you're here. We are joining you from 4 different time zones and 4 different lands, each with their specific relationship to history and to memory. I am sitting in a room in a building on the campus of Colorado College in downtown Colorado Springs, which is located within the unceded territories of the Ute peoples. The original inhabitants of this region also include the Apache, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Pueblo, and Shoshone peoples. The territory of the Kiowa and Navajo also extended into Colorado. There are today in this state 2 federally recognized tribes, the Southern Ute and the Ute Mountain Ute. By naming these people, we might contemplate the ways that our presence, including through our creative and critical work, as manifest in gatherings like these, and looking back in the incarceration of our ancestors, is born upon the traditions, knowledge, and resonant energies of the indigenous peoples of these lands. Every year on February 19th, we mark the anniversary of Executive Order 9066. The first official Day of Remembrance took place in 1978 and was in part an effort to draw attention to the movement for redress, which called for reparations and an acknowledgement of the violation of the civil rights of the Nikkei community. The movement led to the understanding that incarceration was motivated by race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Motivations which, it is not a stretch to say, form a lasting definition of the United States of America. Today, we remember the history in various ways, together and alone, out loud and in our minds, until the day ends and another day begins. Then we mark it again, and again the day after, until the Day of Remembrance becomes Days of Remembrance. And Days of Remembrance becomes a lifetime of remembrance. Each year, the nature of the invitation, as well as the imperative to remember, changes, is troubled or is deepened, and not because the distance between us and the past becomes greater, but because, given the ways the past remains unresolved and unrelieved, it is constantly being revealed that there is no distance at all. I've been thinking today about the sites where our families were incarcerated, some of which are now memorials and museums, some of which are racetracks and shopping malls, some of which are on native reservations, some of which exist as little more than traces, as being sites of a complex and living reality. On Monday, just this week, the Senate passed a bill establishing the Amachi camp here in Colorado as part of the national park system. Meanwhile, in the Topaz camp in Utah, The stone monument memorializing James Hatsuaki Wakasa, an Issei who was murdered in 1943 by a camp guard, was removed violently from its resting place, and with it, the sacred space of return. Protests have been taking place at migrant detention centers and along the US-Mexico border, protests led by Japanese Americans, including elders who were, when they were children, incarcerated under painfully similar pretenses and conditions. I've been thinking today about the waves of anti-Asian violence that move with mournful consistency through the US, about the attention paid to this violence, which also comes and goes in waves, about the rhetoric, which does not come and go in waves, that makes this violence inevitable, and about the need to educate ourselves again about the history of Asians in America. I say again, but I mean always, because education is not a linear achievement, but rather a commitment to consciousness. Maybe because we are surrounded by the unexceptional evidence of race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership, we are also infused with the desire to take hold of this inheritance and shape it in new and reparative ways. Because I have also been thinking today about the fact that we are in the midst of an extraordinary profusion of art that limns these intersections of history and memory, that carries and cares for the heirloom of intergenerational haunting and healing, that draws from tradition, cultural, aesthetic, folkloric, synesthetic, while inventing wholly new forms of expression. Poetry, memoir, graphic novels, children's books, music, dance, film, photography, art, of recovery and resistance, of conscience and love, being made especially by the descendants of those who were incarcerated. This evening, we are going to spend time with 4 of these artists, all of whom are grandchildren of the camps, and all of whom I love and revere. Poet Brynn Saito, artist-performer Kimiko Tanabe, writer Jami Nakamura Lin, and musician-composer Patrick Shiroishi. I'm going to introduce them briefly in the order they will appear. I will also be posting their full bios with links to their work in the chat. They will present their work and then we will all reunite for a conversation at the end. I should also add, that because we cannot see you, it would be wonderful if you said hello in the chat, as I see Kimiko Mar has already done. Hi. So I'm deeply grateful to be sharing space with these 4 artists. Brynn Saito is a poet and author of Power Made Us Swoon and the Palace of Contemplating Departure. She's the co-founder of the Yonsei Memory Project and is an assistant professor of creative writing and English at California State University, Fresno. Brynn's paternal grandparents, Alma Teranishi Saito and Mitsuo Saito, were incarcerated in the Gila River camp. Kimiko Tanabe is a freelance dance artist and a graduate of Colorado College 2016, where she earned a degree in creative writing and dance. She is currently a Gallam moving artist in residence. Her grandparents, Mas and Mieko Tanabe, were incarcerated in the Rower and Topaz camps. Jami Nakamura Lin is the author of the illustrated speculative memoir, The Night Parade, which is coming out from Mariner Books / HarperCollins next year. Jami is of Japanese, Taiwanese, and Okinawan descent. Her grandfather, Tom Nakamura, and his family were incarcerated in Nihamachi camp. Patrick Shiroishi is a multi-instrumentalist and composer based in LA. His recent records include Hidemi from American Dreams and Dissension from Thin Wrist Records. Patrick's paternal grandparents, Pat Hidemi Shiroishi and Dorothy Sayoko Shiroishi, were incarcerated in the Tule Lake camp. Lastly, my grandfather, Midori Shimoda, was incarcerated in a Department of Justice prison in Missoula, Montana, under suspicion of being a spy for Japan. My great uncle Makeo and his family were incarcerated in the Heart Mountain camp. And my great aunt Joy and her family were incarcerated in the Poston camp. Thank you again to everyone for being here and for saying hello to us in the chat. Please welcome Brynn Saito.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, thank you for being here. Brandon, thank you for that incredible introduction and your words that just help ground me in this moment. It's really an honor to be reading alongside and making art and in community with all of you tonight. Okay, I'm going to read three poem things. And the first one is called February 19th, 1942. And it was a poem, little short poem I wrote years and years ago, thinking about today. February 19th, 1942. Moon across the sky in the purple morning, dry earth unfurling. In another California, my grandmother is packing everything she owns into one suitcase, two suitcases, the water still in the clay pitcher, water unwasted, only what she can carry. There is no moment in my life in which this is not happening. What is happiness? Two granddaughters in a summer garden, firstborn, secondborn, and grandmother laughing. There is no moment in which she is not alive and rising, imbuing these hills, this morning's skies with shadows. I think that poem, I guess I was sort of feeling into just, the way this, as Brandon was talking, the way this moment, that happened, 8 decades ago, and this legacy and this history can just feel so present. Even though I was very young when my grandparents passed away, and maybe like a lot of you, I didn't really know what they went through when they were incarcerated at Gila. And that longing to know, I think, fuels a lot of my work. I'm going to read a poem. I wasn't thinking of reading, but I'm going to read I think something about our introduction, Brandon, again, just sort of made me think of this poem. I wrote this poem, I think last year, on the heels of sort of the rising visibility of the violence against Asians and AAPI communities. That of course continues, and sort of wrote it in this moment of just feeling afraid, afraid and grasping for an understanding, when that violence became very visible all of a sudden. And I think that fear, sort of connects me back to the, just sort of the ancestral trauma in a way. So I'm going to read this poem next. It's called Prayer for a Trembling Body. Queen of adrenaline, come to me with your clear wings and wake me a language. Queen of the breathless season of shelter, I'm swelling with blossoms in the great Central Valley. I'm trying to have a child and raging for a sign. I'm pressing my luck against Trump flags, flapping over black trucks, sunrise piercing the Sierras. Dear daughter of unbarracked deserts and trauma, dear queen of cerebrum and spinal cord seas, we survived, says my mother. No grocery store murder, no white power virus. Tell me, why are we only made visible by violence? We are aloe in the long leaves of the childhood garden. We are undammed free waters, rivering grief. Queen of the blood-brain barrier burning, daughter of scapegoat expressive depression, it's night in the sweat bed. In one dream, all the swords with their skull handles pierce the snow stag. In another, I float happy and unclothed under gnarled oak and lotus. Dear radical ancestor, I am eating their language. Help me set down my husband's gun and unstitch my eyes. Show me post-memory ghosts in the name of new justice. Bring me sister mouth refuge in the moon-washed, dog-snarled, irreversible nights. And the last piece I'll read this evening is a letter I wrote to Brandon. A couple years ago, my father and I had the chance to go together to Gila River, the camp that was built on the Gila River Indian community's reservation land, and the place where his parents, my grandparents, Alma and Mitsuo, were incarcerated around the age of 20, in their early 20s. And they met there at the camp. They met and fell in love in camp. And so my dad and I did this trip together, and as a way to kind of process that memory journey, that visitation, that encounter, I wrote a series of letters just to friends and fellow poets and activists and family members, and I wrote to my grandparents and wrote to the ghosts. And I think the letters were this way for me to make sense of that journey and make sense of that visit. So I'll post in the chat. This turned into sort of an online archive of letters and photographic portraits that were taken by my husband, the photographer Dave Lale. And so you can read the letter I'm going to read now that I wrote to Brandon. It was the first letter I wrote after returning from the Gila River Indian Community's reservation land and returning to the Airbnb, and just writing this email to Brandon as a way to kind of make sense of that moment. And the letters kind of bloomed from there. So I will close with this. And again, just thank you for gathering us, Brandon, and thank you all for being here this evening. It's been a while since I read this once. I don't know if I've even read it aloud, so here we go. Letter to Brandon. Yesterday, blackbirds rose from the high brush near the stone memorial at Poston, while my father flung his arms out, marveling and smiling in the sweet unseasonal winds. A half moon hung above the circle of palm trees in the morning light. Weathered, folded cranes lay slumped at the base of the memory marker. Is it too soon to be writing this? Is it too late? You once told me about the prisoners in the Department of Justice camp at Fort Missoula, collecting stones and speculating on the ancient rivers and seas that made them. Driving with my father from California through Joshua Tree and on to Arizona, I felt the smallness of the human project against primordial ridgelines and desert seafloor. I felt the seabed and the wild sea. Now I hear my father coughing in the next room in a stranger's house in the warm hour of Phoenix, having visited 2 concentration camps this week and communed. Having driven together in my tiny Honda up rock-strewn acres to the bright stone monuments with our 2 guides from the Gila River Indian community. Under the high, white afternoon, over the olive trees and mesquite, we felt the bodies of our elders blooming in the steady heat, rising up, rising and rising. Brandon, maybe we are who we remember ourselves to be. Our precarious lives, an act of resistance, our survival, a rebellion. Our ancestors were here together, said our guides, stolen bodies on stolen lands. So the 4 of us stood in a circle, and the wind stood with us, and the memories made us stronger. Tractor rides and bartered pomegranates, koi ponds, talent shows, night shootings, urns. Dear Brandon, Nikiko, Mia, Todd, dear Brian, Patricia, Koji, and Sean, didn't we dance? Didn't we rise from July's belly, bon odori, moving to the taiko stomps in the circle of families, learning the shapes of honor early on? We were site-specific and dangerous in our pleasure. We were talk story, breathless laughter, and ancestral rage. Now I hear violins singing in the barrack bones 80 years on. Creosote overtakes the old foundations. Its healing spines break concrete. Is it possible to send promises backwards? Tell me, Brandon, what do you think? Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Wow. Thank you, Brynn, for sharing all of that. I feel like I'm like coming out of a world that you just put me in. Wow. It makes me feel really, really grateful to be here in the presence of all of these artists. And yeah, I'm Kimiko. I'm the granddaughter of Mas and Mieko Tanabe. And my granddad was incarcerated in Aurora, Arkansas. And my grandmother at a Tanforan Assembly Center and then Topaz Relocation Center in Utah. And I got really stressed out when I was trying to figure out what I was going to share, because I was like, I need to figure out exactly what the right way to remember this is. And it's in like a 10 to 12 minute period of time. And like, what do I want people to walk away with and XYZ? And I was like, that's a lot of responsibility to be putting on myself. And I think it's just like a classic state that I'm in of like, how do I remember this thing? And how do I remember it on a day of remembrance, which is like this thing that I'm always remembering, and some other people might also be choosing to remember it together. And so I just think this like collective ability to like, yeah, it doesn't really matter what I share. It's the act of remembering together, because I think that forgetting is violent. So I'm just really grateful to be here in a space with artists who are practicing remembering together. Yeah, I am a dancer, and I'm going to share an excerpt of a work in progress that lives somewhere in between like film and live performance. And it's called Portrait of Myself as a Yurei. And yurei are they're these Japanese ghosts with they're like long hair and these broken wrists, and they were wronged in like their lifetime. And in death, they're able to come back with this release and just wreak havoc on the world. And so I've been trying to like ask myself a question of what is it to create a portrait of myself as a yurei, to maybe access an emotional spectrum that my grandparents weren't afforded to think about around incarceration and internment. So I'm gonna try to share my screen. I guess if someone wants to let me know if it's working or not, that would be cool. Okay. Share screen. Screen shared. Does it work? I guess there's no one here to know. Okay, cool.
So she's going to go to Topaz, Kimmy is, to go visit the museum at Topaz.
Oh.
And you were there, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there anything you can tell Kimmy about that?
It's very dusty.
Very dusty?
Yeah. Don't take any good clothes.
Okay.
And the wind just blows in the dust. If there's any,
Like opening in the door?
opening of the door or opening of the window.
Did you have openings in your doors and windows in your house?
Yeah, just a little,
Because it was wood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the dust came through. How did you get it out?
Well, you don't really get it out.
You just never got rid of it.
You just have to live with it.
when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous.
Serve in the army, and so it was to avoid the draft that they pulled up roots and immigrated to the U.S. via Hawaii. So there are lots of so-called East cities like my father.
a rather unresolved excerpt, but yeah, thank you all.
Wow, Kimiko, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just so grateful and overwhelmed to be in community with you all here, Brandon and Kimiko and Brynn and Patrick, and thank you to Colorado College for having us. I, like Kimiko was saying, felt a lot of like stress over what to prepare for this. I feel like I always have this pressure myself to be like, okay, if I'm talking about incarceration, then it must have some like rousing call to action, you know, or like being like, how am we bringing this past into the future? And I think there's just like a lot of internal feeling of like, what does like the day of remembrance need to be, or what is it? What are we pushing to do? So again, I'm just glad to be here in this space. I'm Jami Nakamura Lin, and I'm going to be reading a little chunk from my book, Night Parade, which uses yokai and other Japanese and Taiwanese and Okinawan legendary like monster figures to talk about contemporary fears. And I'd like also to thank Lisa Hoffman-Kuroda, who I think is here, who helped me with a lot of this research for my book. And so this is from a chapter called The Naming. During the pandemic, when all of our communities were forced apart, we relied again on the Amabie. The Amabie lives in the sea. It is safer, though not safe. She knows that no place on this planet is safe, not anymore. Therefore, she's going to get as much joy out of the water as she can, the way her body glides. She only gets up the gumption for shore every couple hundreds of years. The last time she appeared was in the spring of 1846. Back then, some villagers from Kumamoto Prefecture in the south of Japan saw something glowing in the water off the coast. They thought. They rubbed their eyes. Perhaps they drank too much sake. The next night, they saw the glowing thing again, and then the next night, and the next night, and finally, they sent out an official to investigate. Luckily for us, we have documentation of what the official witnessed come out of the sea. A mermaid-like creature covered in scales, with long black hair, the beak of a bird, and 3 fin-like legs. She greeted the official. Hello, she said. Hello, said the village official. I'm the Amabie, said the Amabie. I live in the offing. She gestured to the water behind her with one of her fins. Before the official could get over his shock, she gave him 2 important messages. First, that the province would have a bountiful harvest for the next 6 years. The official rejoiced inside. But also, added the Amabie, with a swish of her 3 fins, when disease befalls your land, and it will, draw a picture of me and show the picture to everyone to keep them safe. Then she slipped them back in the water. Her message and her image was disseminated that year in the local Kawadaban, a woodblock printed newspaper. The print went up and down the post road. And then the disease passed, and everyone forgot about her for a century and a half, until she heard tell of another disease ravaging the lands. Don't do it, the other sea creatures told her when she heard about the coronavirus. Don't go up there. They lolled around in the Dragon King's palace. The dolphins ate their shrimp cocktails. The shrimp ate their plankton cocktails. The world of men is no concern of ours, they said. They don't deserve you or your gift. It's true, of course, we don't, but still something pulled her towards the surface. And so while the rest of us were hiding away, quarantined in our homes, in our bodies, quickly becoming more and more husk and less human, she came ashore again. She reminded people of her existence. Draw a picture of me, she said. Send a picture of me to keep your people safe, she said. And what once took months down the post road now only takes a second. Friends and family, kept apart by the pandemic, sent the Amabie's picture to each other as a way of protection. The image of the Amabie was shared on 5 continents, and tens of thousands of unique paintings and illustrations were created of her. Her image became the face of Japan's Ministry of Health Public Safety campaign. Her image passed around the globe again and again and again. Be safe, be well. The popularity of the Amabie is partially because in this dark time, the yokai's appearance is cute and joyful. But the Amabie is also an amulet. Amabie is a prayer or a hope made tangible. I believe in prayer, but I also believe in something you can hold in your hand. I believe in something you can rub through your fingers. In the early days of the pandemic, I kept a plastic bin outside my yard so I could give or receive things from my friends without physical contact. Many of these people were from our Japanese American community, family friends whose relationships have developed generation over generation, nisei to gosei. We exchanged tiny offerings. This person had extra rolls of toilet paper. Be safe. That person delivered 10 batches of cookie dough. Be well. 50-pound bags of flour, 1 pound of yeast, the messages going round and round. What do you need? What can I give? Each concrete item holding back the storm. Our infrastructures were failing, but this community was not. It reminded me of 2018, when my father was dying and my daughter was born, and food would arrive on our doorstep, months of dinners. Neat bundles of somen with a Tupperware of all the toppings and another Tupperware of dressing. People even brought rice with the curry, with the chili. Usually people assume that you can just make rice since the rice cooker is as simple as the microwave, but at that time, people sent the rice along. The death house, I called us back then. Often you do not know what to say to the death house. What is there often to say? Instead, these bundles of food. Be safe, be well. Long before my father's death, long before the pandemic, my grandfather was released from a Machi incarceration camp. A few years later, he hopped on a cross-country bus from California, aiming for New York. His money ran out in Chicago, and he lived in a bus station for a few weeks until he heard that there was a bar where camp people hung out. He went to the bar and ran into someone he knew from camp. That person's mother ran a rooming house, and she let my grandfather live with her for 6 months, rent-free. And he got his first photography job in Chicago because he looked through the paper and saw a name he recognized, another person he knew from camp. When infrastructure fails, there is community. Japanese professor Takada Tomoki argues that the fact that there are so many yokai legends that have to do with natural disasters tells us that Japanese people were often facing these kinds of natural disasters and were at the same time accumulating and passing down knowledge about these disasters and how to avoid them. This knowledge is contained in the yokai legends. The yokai tales are not just for entertainment, but for education. How do we protect ourselves? How do we avoid disaster? The Mabie story speaks to a different kind of calamity, but also explains a way to avoid disaster, to turn to your community, to reach out to it, to give to it, and to receive it. This year, my grandfather will be 94. My daughter, Agose, is 4. They are 90 years apart. And when I see them together, something breaks and mends, breaks and mends. The past and the future are holding hands together. For how long? I don't know. When I think of incarceration, I think of what knowledge was passed down to us, both through our stories and through our bodies, orally, textually, epigenetically. What we have inherited from the Issei and the Nisei, and what will we pass down to the Gosei, the Rokusei, the Nanasei? What kind of community will we have as we wash down what my sister Corey calls the river of time? My grandfather tells me that when he was in Namachi, his mother and other Issei mothers followed an old tradition and created fabric belts or pieces of cloth for their Nisei sons who were going off to fight in the 442, the Japanese American infantry unit. They would pass the fabric on to other people at camp, and each person would make 1 stitch or knot on the fabric with the goal of getting 1,000 stitches so that the person carrying it into battle would have the strength of 1,000 men. My great-grandmother made such a belt for my great-uncle Joe. My grandfather and his siblings all sewed on a single stitch. Afterwards, they brought it around to the rest of the barracks, where all the members of each family in camp embroidered a stitch, each person adding their own version of hope or prayer or be safe, be well into that slip of fabric. Thank you.
Thank you, Jami and Brynn and Kimiko and Brandon. I'm really honored to be part of this. And like everyone was saying, I was super nervous today or all this week, kind of thinking about what I should do. But, upon joining this and hearing and watching everyone's work, I feel really at home, and so thank you guys all. So my name is Patrick Shiroishi. I'm a 4th generation. My grandparents, Pat Hidemi and Sadako Dorothy, were held at Tule Lake. I have this image of camp in my head. I never met my grandfather, He passed away before I was born. But he and my grandma met and got married in the camps. And so for me, you know, as ugly as the camps are, you know, there was one really beautiful thing that came from that. And so I kind of keep that hope with me, even, you know, even now when there's so many awful things happening, especially, you know, towards Asian Americans. And so I try and reflect that in the music that I create, by mixing, you know, different extended techniques, or I'm going to be showing a video in a little bit, but I'm running my saxophone through guitar effect pedals and then out of amps. And so I wanted to create this sort of ugliness to the tone, you know, but that there still is a melody that prevails. And to me, that, you know, is the whole thing of the music that I try and create, that, you know, at times it is, you know, my dad would say, you know, ugly sounding or like loud, but that there is, you know, a melody or a message behind it. Yeah, and so I'm gonna go ahead and try and share screen too. So this works. Okay, maybe not. Well, do you think I could send it to you, Brandon, and you could share screen it? Okay, thank you. And so the video is going to be from a record that I wrote called Descendants. And it was kind of my, what I imagined what it would be like in the camps. And that was released last 2 years ago. And then late last year, I released a record called Hidemi, which is based off of what I imagine what my grandfather's journey was after the camps. I know there's a lot of talk and, you know, stories about how the camps were, brutal, you know, conditions, but I think equally as intense and brutal and ugly was the journey after. You know, there was a lot of, like Jamie said, you know, there was a cross country, yes, we can see the video, you know, journey to New York, but you know, my grandparents also traveled from Tule Lake to Chicago. They lost their house, they lost all their belongings in the house that they lived, even though, you know, they asked their neighbors to, you know, watch over their things. And after they came out, they were gone. And, you know, they tried working. Luckily, they also found community and they, you know, were able to work and save up. And one of the stories my aunt told me was that they would save up all their money that they made. And 1 week they would buy one, you know, fork. And the next week they would buy a second fork. And then next week they would buy a knife. And then until they had all these things and everything. But okay, so this video titled Grandchildren of the Camps, I took the video from a propaganda, you know, video that the US put out, I think trying to make it seem that the conditions were really nice for, you know, what happened. And then on top of it is Rob Sato's artwork, who he's also, his grandparents were also in the camps, and he did the cover art. And so it's kind of layered on top of that. Oh, I think you might have to share the audio maybe.
Are we all in here together?
I think so.
Oh, thanks so much to all of you. That was really incredible. It's funny, you were each saying in different ways about how you were talking about how in preparation for tonight you were stressed or nervous or thinking about the responsibility, trying to figure out what you were going to share. And I felt the same way. And I also felt like, I mean, I still have some kind of strange current coursing through my body right now, but I think, Patrick, you said at a certain point, arriving into this space together, that you felt at home. And I feel at home, even as I'm trying to understand what exactly that feeling is. I'm just curious to hear from all of you. I have so many things I want to ask and so many things I want to say, and in a way I just want to hang out. But I'm wondering how you all feel after sharing what you shared, and also listening to each other's work and looking at each other's work and listening on this day of remembrance, but right, like a lifetime of remembrance. But how are you all feeling right now? What's going through your minds?
The words that came to me were like haunted, haunted, but also held somehow, like this kind of both things. And yeah, a little bit sort of broken open and tired and thinking a lot about like Jamie's question too, like okay, it's it's Day of Remembrance, and there's so much sort of weight around it, and what is there to say? And I write about this work, and I write these poems, and we I do the community like kind of in the work, and then like there are these moments where I'm really just speechless. I think we're all like this phrase, grandchildren of the camps. It just kind of floors me that it's like we are in these ways, and we're also in other ways grandchildren of like the life and the resilience that came after, and the survival that came, and the joy, and yet we're here together, and Zoom and without Zoom, like would the five of us ever be able to? I mean, I'm sure we could, but it's just, yeah, that was very inarticulate. I'll pass it to somebody else maybe.
I think I'm struck by the power of multiplicity and, just seeing it come out through different, through music and through dance. And Kimiko, I think there was that part in your piece where your arm was trembling in a way that I did not know an arm could tremble. And it just like showed so much of like how much of this stuff we hold in our body. And, writing often is very like in your head, but I think dance obviously and music to some extent too is like such like an embodied experience. And I think a thing that makes me think, oh, like I don't have to have so much anxiety about like what is the right thing to say, is that when like there's so many of us, so we don't each have to like say all the things. Everyone, it's just like layers and layers.
I was watching, there was that long sequence, Kimiko, where you were on the stool and I was just watching your hands. And they almost like came out of the screen in a certain way. They were interacting with each other and everything else kind of disappeared. And I was either now or at some point, I'm very curious to hear about how you kind of manage your hands or what your hands might be thinking when you put them through moments like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that part, the part that I shared and the part that I'm kind of like tugging with at the work right now is this descent into the afterlife and what does that look like? And so this moment of to become another being, there has to be some type of death. And so what is it to like, I think in that moment, it's just like kind of the hair, it's kind of like draining something of myself out. And that gives, moments for something else to come alive. And so I think it's kind of like that, like that opportunity for something else to be waking up. And I think a lot about isolation when I think about internment and the journey to understand internment. I think it's very isolating. And so what is it to descend into the afterlife and have the body actually become isolated from itself? So I think that's kind of where that exploration came from. And so I'm thinking about the descent. And then as I think about the descent, I also am thinking about what the reintegration looks like. And I'm arrived at a section of the piece that I realized I need to have a fun section in order to get through the work. So it's called The Festival. And I don't know what's going to happen in the festival yet, but yeah, the hands have to be supported because, yeah. But I think I feel really in my body right now, which is a refreshing and scary and tender place to feel. That music, Patrick, was like, oh, I feel like I have to like comb some things through myself, and I think what Jami was sharing about all the different forms and just that everyone's sharing, and I can't see anyone else. I can only see you all on this screen. So it just feels like this like wonderful family reunion of generations past and present are all here. But yeah, I
was actually thinking about family reunions, and there was something Brynn, the Yonsei Memory Project had a day of remembrance last night. Was that last night? And there was some image, towards the end of the evening, you were imagining, I think you and your co-presenters were imagining your grandparents or your ancestors all knowing each other in camp because they were all in Gila River together, right? And I was thinking, as I was listening to everyone tonight, that it's a kind of family reunion in the sense that there's this moment maybe in a family reunion where all of the elders, they're all sitting around and they summon all the children and they say, okay, now it's time for you to perform for us. And I sort of felt like this is us performing for the elders, except they're not. I mean, they're here in a sense, but
my grandpa's here because my aunt's writing in the chat about what he's saying right now.
He's here?
So sweet.
She says Grandpa Nakamura says he doesn't have to say anything because the grandchildren are saying it all.
Oh, he's here.
So I think that means so much to me that he can like hear what we're saying.
Oh, I wish his screen would pop up here somehow. Brynn, there was something you were saying I think when you were introducing your work, that the history that is not history feels really present. And I'm wondering for everyone, what is it, if that's true, what is it for you all that feels present? If you can even kind of define what it is for you. Sorry, big big question.
Pass. Yeah, I don't know. I think through the letters, I think that was a way for me to just specifically like maybe a longing to feel more close to my elders, the elders who passed when I was quite young. So I think when I think about that time or what feels present, it does feel like them. Like it kind of feels like, grandma and grandpa somewhere. And also thinking about my Korean American grandparents as well, feels a little bit like anytime I write those letters or I open that portal, that something like a piece of them is wanting to come through or wanting to be close somehow. And it's kind of strange and maybe related to some of thinking about the Yurei and these other kind of forces and these other, it's almost, I can't quite put language to it. But then they'll show up in my dreams, and I'll have these moments with them in my dream life that that just feel really special anytime I'm maybe writing about them. And that was a question, that came up last night at our event was, I imagine that I spend so much time thinking about our history and the past, and I imagine I'm using my imagination as a form of memory work too. Like so much of memory is imagination. And then I started to wonder, did they imagine me? Did they imagine us? Could they have imagined the five of us in this space 80 years later, talking about them and their lives? And could they have imagined this? Did they imagine us? It's a question that's been resonating, but yeah, I'm curious for others. What does that presence feel like?
Something changed for me last night, in that I always feel really like I have this deep embodied sense of like I do work and make art about incarceration and internment, but I'm doing something wrong when I'm doing that. Like I think the embodied experience of like we don't talk about this feels really ingrained inside of me, so that anytime I do, I almost feel like it's a secret that I'm doing because I have to do it, but I shouldn't be sharing it with anyone. And even though I can logic how that's not the case, it is like my embodied experience. And so last night I was listening to an artist panel, and someone was talking about, the artist was like reflecting about the pandemic and the fear that they have around the place that we're at in the pandemic of the forgetting, where they're like, I fear that we're going to return to normal and our bodies and the consequences of this time are so real, but we're just going to like be asked to return back to normal. And like how deeply afraid they were of that, and how deeply I became afraid of that. And like, I think everyone in the room was kind of like, yes, it would be very violent to forget. And I just couldn't also help holding the experience of incarceration in my mind while they were talking about that, and just thinking about what it would be like to be violently uprooted and then just asked to move forward in your life and not have the space to remember it. And so I think as I was thinking about that last night, I was actually thinking about like what a healing thing it is to remember, to have that space to process and to talk about it. And it's actually like not a bad thing. It is the healing. It's the thing that was not afforded to my grandparents at that time. And like now we all have the chance to be doing that. And so I really think that what's present for me right now is not this like tugging of like, oh, I gotta say something, but I really should be very quiet about it. And now it's just like, I actually just feel like every time I can speak about it and talk about it and call it into something, it's a healing moment and it's a gift. So, and it feels best to do that in the support and presence of other artists doing the same. So that's kind of what's present for me in my body. But in the last phone call, I was like, I'm exhausted. So I don't know. Ask me in 2 weeks. We'll see where I'm at.
I'm kind of similar. I wasn't aware of everyone's work, until, Brandon assembled us. And up until then, I didn't know many people who were putting that, that into their art. Save for like, there's a couple like kids books that I read when I was younger. But, it's like refreshing and hopeful for me that, I have peers in different, different genres and different art forms that are trying to, process the same way that I am, and trying to express that in, so many different ways. So I feel I'm bummed about the whole, everything that's happened, but like at the same time, like I feel very like strong that, I'm here and, everyone is, it sounds like no one's going to give up or stop doing what they're doing. They're not gonna, be quiet. Like, same, like I definitely felt like Kimiko, like, should I be like talking about this or like, talking about it through my music and whatnot. But there have been a lot of people who have reached out to me that didn't know the camps happened, from like Europe, or they're like, oh, I picked up your record and, I didn't know this happened. I was like, you should look into it. And you should tell a couple of your friends, make sure that they look into it too, because yeah. Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now.
I think for me, I was lucky in that, well, for one, like my grandfather is still, alive and still talking about it. He was the one who sent me the email today about the Senate thing. So like that, the fact that we still can have this relationship is just, I think, really meaningful to me, especially since my father died, that he's like, my only like male figure, elder left. But I think because he had kept this journal during camp, that like a school project. So we have that, time that he wrote about the camp, like while he was there. And then he was like writing a memoir about it, like later on now. And I think because we had that storytelling experience, that like by the time I was like, old enough to think about it, that he would talk to us about it more. And we had this document that it always felt like, okay, this is something that like I can talk about. But I think for me, it's always been like, I'm like, I feel like I need to say the right thing, like I was saying before. And even today, I tweeted about it and I did the math wrong. And I said 60 years ago instead of 80 years ago. And then I felt like, and then a bunch of people like retweeted it. And I felt like this like deep gutting shame of being like, people, this is the only day that people pay attention to Day of Remembrance. And I said the wrong fact. And people are like, and it was just always like the idea of like, it needs to be the right story because people don't know about it or whatever. But again, like I said before, just like being able to like talk to people like right now is like, okay, it's okay to not have like the perfect, it's just our experiences and what we remember. And I think, yeah, that's what I'm trying to sit with too, is that there doesn't have to be like one perfect incarceration remembrance, but just this collage.
Yeah, I'm trying to sit with or maybe live with the idea or the possibility that just by being, we are embodying remembrance, that we don't actually have to do anything, there is assembling you all out of a deep admiration, but also the time that I spend with with all of your work outside of a gathering like this feels like remembrance. Even if I'm thinking about something else, like it's entering into me in a way that feels like, for that moment anyway, I'm connecting with something that that I really want to be connecting with. Like I've been thinking about Patrick, the grandchildren of the camps, and I've been listening to that on the loop. When I first found it, I started listening to it on a loop, almost as if I was looking for something. Like I needed to hear it constantly. I was writing to it. I felt like listening to it repetitively would motivate something to be revealed in what I was working on. But then more simply, that it was helping me to look, even though I don't know what it is that I'm looking for at this age, whether that's driven by melancholy or research or whatever it might be. But aside from all that, I'm so grateful to all of your work, and then to you for all of your work. And then there are so many young artists, especially, who are encountering this subject for the first time and responding via art. And it's very inspiring. It's also troubling in a way, because it feels to a certain extent like it's something that we can't not confront. That we are kind of burning with these questions that are ultimately unanswerable, because what is it that we want to ask? And what do we do with the answers if we even receive them? So I just want to thank you all again. And you know, I wish we could do a part 2 and a part 3 of this. I wish we could meet obviously in person and have that kind of family reunion where we're performing in front of our elders and they can laugh at us. And what's that, Patrick? I should mention, by the way, that Patrick made the heroic move of joining us from his place of work. So you're somewhere in some back room with instruments too, I think.
Yeah, well, thanks for making the time a little later. I know I kind of made it a late evening for everyone that's, not on the West Coast.
Yeah. Kimiko's in New York. Jami's in Chicago.
Yep, outside. Yep, suburbs.
Chicago. Brynn is in Fresno. Patrick's in LA. I'm in Colorado. To be mindful of everyone's time, maybe we should say goodbye and good night now. But again, thank the 4 of you so much. And I'm grateful for your work. I'm grateful for everyone that attended. I wish we could see you all. But I guess we're staring into the imagination of all of your faces. And hi to Grandpa Nakamura. Thank you for joining us. I wish we could ask you questions and have you answer. All these people in the chat, thank you, so grateful. Thanks everyone. Today's the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. February 24th was also when Japanese Canadians faced their expulsion from the West Coast. So obviously this is one day in a lifetime that transcends generations. So these are things we're thinking about. These are things that we're working through and making art about, and we're really grateful to have these conversations. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you.